Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
Back once again at the corner of truth and courage. Thank you for joining us here today. We've been talking over the last few days about the subject of nationalism and what the Bible has to say on this topic. Is it sinful to be nationalistic? Seems like today in America that is a dirty word. You have one part of our country that is kind of saying it's sinful to be proud about your nation. We have nothing to be proud about, America. And I'm here to say every nation will have its sins. They will. America is not a perfect nation. By far, it is not. There are some good that we have accomplished, and there's some evil, wicked things that we have put into this world that we will answer to God for. We've led the world into many sins. We are a leader in the world. We have produced some terrible things from Hollywood and other things that have been broadcasted around the world and taught. But has there been good? Yes. Does every nation share in some fault? Yes, absolutely. Slavery did not start with America. Slavery didn't start with the Europeans. Mistreatment of people has gone on through centuries, even during Bible days, conquering and enslaving of people as if like it all started with us. It didn't. So there are some generational issues and sins that every nation will have to deal with, and some shame and guilt in that. But this subject of nationalism, I think, has been lost in the idea here in America that it's that we should be ashamed of what our history has, some of the wrong that we have done, and we should, in a sense, be destroyed as a nation. It seems like that's what they're trying to teach our young people, that America doesn't deserve to be around, and we've enjoyed our wealth off the backs of everyone else, and we deserve to fail and let others have their opportunity, their prosperity. Again, then I ask this question: what will happen to some of the values that we bring to this world, like freedom of speech, and freedom to have your own property, and freedom to have your own mind and conscience of who you worship and stuff? If we don't hold to that, and if that is abolished in America, who will be the guardians of freedom? I hear from my Canadian friends that they are very concerned for their nation because of what they're seeing in America. If America loses its freedoms, Canada will hardly hold on to theirs. And it will be a domino effect. And who will be the guardian of freedom if America loses it? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. But I want to dive into this idea of nationalism and look to the Bible for a moment. Now, Israel is a great example of nationalism. It began with Abraham. Abraham told him in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, "Now the Lord said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee." So he was going to search for this land of promise. And with that covenant, with that promise that God gives him, he says, "I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing, and I'll bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed." Refer to this passage as the Abrahamic covenant. So this was the beginning of the story of the nation of Israel, how God would bless a man and his family, his children. And from those, the children of Abraham came Isaac, and the tribes of Israel was born. But also coming out of Abraham was Ishmael and the tribes of the Arabs. And there's been a constant conflict in the Middle East, the Arab and the Israelite family feud, or the Ishmael-Isaac family feud has been going on for quite some time. But God gave, though, to Abraham and to the children, the seed of Abraham and Isaac, certain instructions so that they would form a nation that God desired. And from this, we get the idea of nationalism. They were strong nationalists, very clearly. They had strict instructions not to mix with other nations. Why? Because God didn't want them to wander away from what God was designing them to be. He didn't want them to go after other gods in other ways. He wanted them to be faithful to his ways. And they were given customs to make them different from everyone else. They were to dress differently. Their diet was different. Circumcision was given to them to make them different, to stand out, that they, could be identified clearly as these are children of God. However, they were not to look down on the other nations, the Gentile nations, nor were they to mistreat them. They weren't to think highly of themselves, and unfortunately, they did. They began to think, well, we're children of Abraham. Matthew chapter 3, verse 9. And think not to say to yourselves, we have Abraham to our father. Don't be so lifted up with your pride to think that you're something else because you are children of Abraham, that Abraham is your father. This principle is taught to us very clearly in Christianity, that we're not to think highly of ourselves in that regard. In Romans chapter 12, verse 3, and to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. But this pride came into the nation of Israel, and they began to change the laws of God, began to add to God's laws, and created a big mess for themselves. And then they started looking to mix in their marriage and adding to their religions, and started out of their pride getting into trouble. And that's so true for every nation. Pride will destroy a nation. That's what I fear for America. America, we think we're too big to fail. We think we can do whatever we want, and God's just going to rubber stamp it, because even if it's not really God's desire and plan for us there, because we want to go that way, God will bless it because we're mighty America. We got a front row seat in heaven. No, don't be so high thinking of yourself. That's one of the reasons why we're in trouble, is because we do think that way. But what happens, though, when government, if we are to be respectful to our government, and we are, very clearly taught that in the New Testament, in Romans, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. So here we're instructed that as government is set up, God instituted government. God instituted the powers to be in government. God instituted first the family, then he instituted secondly the government, and third he instituted the church. These are the three great institutions that God brought to this world so that we could function in God's order, in God's plan. And government is one of those things. Sometimes, though, just because government has power doesn't mean that they're always going to be righteous. Just because a nation passes a law doesn't mean that a law is a righteous law. For example, in America now, we've made laws to say that you can kill your baby. Now, we're not going to call it that. No. We're not going to call that murder or, killing a baby. We're going to use different terms to kind of take away the reality. We're going to, believe the lie that it's not a baby there. It's just tissue. And it's just a health care, contraception. Just like removing, an unneeded organ or a problematic organ that's in your body. After all, woman has rights to her body. She does, but that's not just her body, is it? It's her baby's body. What about the rights to her baby's body? Well, we could go deep and deep into that one, can't we? But we are instructed to be subject to the higher powers. And we're also told in Romans 12, verse 18, that we're to live peaceably with all men, if it be possible. As much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Get along as much as you possibly can. But sometimes there are times that the government and laws require us to disobey God. At least that's what they sometimes do. Now, when that happens, what are we to do? Well, we have very good examples. Remember Peter and John? When the magistrate said to them, you're not to be out here preaching in Jesus' name and preaching this doctrine and stuff there. And they beat them and threw them in jail and released them, gave them strict orders not to do it again. And guess what were they doing the very next morning? Back in the marketplace preaching. Then Peter and the other apostles said in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, we ought to obey God rather than man. When man now makes a law that requires them to disobey God's law, then we're put into a choice. And our choice should be we're going to obey God rather than man. But how does that work when we're still to be subject to the higher powers? Is the Bible telling us to disobey what the Bible told us to do? I mean, here we have one verse saying, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. And God's given these powers to ordain them, in government, and you're to obey them. And here they didn't do that. Now, follow me. Some people miss this. There's a difference between obeying and disobeying and submitting. They chose to obey God, but they submitted to the consequences. They're still subjecting themselves to the higher powers. They could not disobey God. They obeyed God. They went out and preached. They weren't going to disobey what God had told them to do. Don't tell us we can't preach. We're going to preach. But they submitted to the consequences for disobeying the laws of man. Thus, they submitted. They didn't fight being arrested. They didn't fight being in jail. They submitted to it. Remember the Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? I love that passage there in chapter 3. As they say to the most powerful man in the world, King Nebuchadnezzar, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Sorry, God could deliver us, or he may not. But be it known, we're going to not to obey you and serve your gods. We can't do that. We can't disobey our God. God delivered them on that day. But they subjected themselves to the consequence. There's always that. We can disobey, but we must submit to the consequences of that. So therefore, we're obeying the Scriptures. Well, we've been talking about nationalism. There's a lot to deal with there. And if your nation isn't right with God, pray for it. Pray for the leaders. My prayer every election is, God, don't give America what we deserve. Give us what we need. Well, that's going to be it for today. Join us again tomorrow at the corner of Truth and Courage. God bless you.